Now that we've populated our listing page, it's time to light up our single recipe template. And to do that, we're going to need to write a fresh GraphQL query. So we're going to go back to our GraphQL sandbox, and we'll just delete what we already have. And we're going to write a new query. So we're going to start with the query keyword. We're going to call this get single recipe. And we're going to pass in some variables. We're going to filter by section, again, just like we did with our listing page. And again, that's an array of strings. And now we're also going to filter by the entry slug. So that's going to be how we tell Craft what specific entry we're trying to get the data for. And that is also an array of strings. And in this case, we want to make sure that a slug variable is submitted in order to return any data. Otherwise, we don't want to return any data. So to do that, we want to make this variable required. And we do that by adding a exclamation point flag to the end of the type declaration. So that's all we need for that. So now we need to write our entry query. And so we're going to start typing, and this time instead of entries plural, we just want a singular entry result. And we're going to do that using Craft's entry keyword. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us a single object of data rather than an array of objects. So that means we won't have to loop through a list of entries. We'll just get one single object that we can use and pull variables from. So we'll go ahead and pass in our section, our filters here, and our slug. So again, we're just pulling in what we passed to the top level GraphQL query. All right, and then we're just going to tell it what kind of fields we want. So we want our title. We don't need ID or URI for this particular template, so we'll just skip that, and now we'll just drill down straight to our custom field. So we're going to use our triple dot on keyword. And then again, we're looking for the recipe entry type. And then we're going to grab our image and the URL for our image. And then we are going to pull in our ingredients table fields. And since it's a table field, it has rows, and it's going to return an array of rows. And so we need to tell it specifically which columns we want to pull in. So we want quantity, ingredient, the specific ingredient name, and preparation. And then the last thing we need is our instructions. And this is a CK editor field. And CK editor lets us pull in our data a couple of different ways. We can do plain text, we can do markdown. We want raw HTML. And that's going to pull in our HTML tags for use on our React template. Okay, so let's click play to confirm that everything is working as it should be. Oh, we're getting an error. It says variable slug of required type string was not provided. So remember, we made this slug variable a required variable, and we didn't actually pass in a slug in our variables. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go slug. And again, it's an array of strings, and we'll just do buttermilk pancakes for our test. All right, let's try it again. Okay, here we go. We've got our buttermilk pancake data, we've got our image, an array of all of our ingredients with each column that we requested, and then just a raw HTML output of our instructions. So this is ready to go. So let's plug it into our React front end. So we're going to do just what we did with our listing page, and we're going to create a query file. So we're going to create a new file in our data folder, and we're going to call this single recipe query. And inside of that, we're going to do just what we did before. We're going to import our GQL class from Apollo, and then we're going to create a variable. And we're going to call this get single recipe. And then we call our class backticks, and then we'll go in and we will copy paste our query. And export. Now we will call the query inside of our single entry template. This is going to be different depending on what framework you're using, or if you're using a framework at all. So for me, in my Next.js pages router, my entry template is inside recipes and a file called slug. So we need to import some classes in order to call our query. So we're going to import useQuery again, like we did before. from Apollo, and then we're also going to import our query, get single recipe query that we just created. And one last thing that we're going to import, at least for me in Next.js, is I'm going to import something called use router. And this is how Next.js is going to tell me what the slug for our particular entry is. If you are using a different framework from Next.js, then your particular framework may have a different method of telling you what slug you're on. So when I am on, so if I click through and I am on recipes buttermilk pancakes, this is how Next.js is going to tell me that our slug that we're currently visiting is buttermilk pancakes. So use whatever method your particular setup needs to use in order to grab that entry slug. So I'm just going to create a new variable called router, and I'm just going to initialize my router. And then I'm going to pull in the slug from that. Now we need to set up our query variables again. So we're just going to create a new variable called query variables. And we've got our section, which again is recipes, and our slug. All right, last thing to do is to run the Apollo query. So we create some variables, data, and we use query. We pass in our get single recipe and our variables. And we'll just rewrite our same error checks that we wrote before. Okay, so now we'll just go ahead and check to make sure that we are getting data back. So we'll just console log our data variable. Okay, we are getting back an object titled entry, and all of our data looks like it is populating correctly. So now we can go ahead and plug it into our component. So to do that, I'm going to create a new variable called entry, and that's just going to be a shortcut so that we don't have to type data.entry every time we use our variable. It's just a little time saver that I like to do. So we'll just pass in our title. This head component is a component that Next.js provides for passing in meta information. All right, let's pass in our entry title. And then our image. The first item in the array, and then the URL. Now for our ingredients, we need to loop through the rows, each row in the ingredient field. So we'll just go entry, ingredients, map. And we'll just call this row, and also going to use the index for our React key. Okay. All right, our key is our index. So we're going to go row quantity. And then row ingredients. And preparation is an optional field, so it won't always be there. So we're just going to make this conditional within React. So we're going to check to see if row preparation has a value. And if it does, then we'll add a comma and a space. And then we will output the data. And then last but not least, we have instructions. And since this provides its own HTML, we can just remove this whole block and just go entry, instructions, raw HTML. All right. We should be good, so let's pull it up and see how we did. All right, looking good. We got our title, we got our image, ingredients are good. We've got our optional preparation item here, but looks like instructions is outputting the HTML tags as text. So in order to parse this HTML correctly, we need to import a library that will parse our HTML tags within React. So let's go ahead and import that library. Let's install it in our package manager. So it's npm install It's called HTML React Parser. We're just going to install that. Now we're going to go and we're going to import it. And the item we need is called parse. And then all we have to do is just go down to our ingredients and wrap it in parse. All right, and now that we've done that, that should parse our HTML correctly, which it has. So that looks great. So this template is looking awesome. Everything is populating correctly, but I just want to do one last thing, which is set up some 404 error handling in case someone tries to access a page that does not exist. Because right now, if we just type in some junk, we get an error, which we don't want. I want to display some kind of a proper 404 page. So to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is, again, for me, Next.js has a nice pre-built component for handling errors. And so I'm just going to import that. And I'm going to use that for displaying my 404 page. You may want to handle your errors differently, or your framework may have a different way of handling errors. And so again, this is Next.js specific. So use whatever error handling method makes sense for you. And so when an entry doesn't exist in Craft, let's pass in a non-existent slug just to test. It will return a null value. So all we have to do is just check for that null value. And if the returned data is null, then we are going to return our error. And that's it. Now, if I try to access a non-existent template, then I will get a nice Next.js 404 page. So with that, we have finished setting up our single entry page. And so with our listing all lit up here and our single entry page looking nice as well, we've got a pretty nice site ready to go. We could just leave it here, but why don't we add some extra user experience improvements to really make this an especially nice site to use? And so in the next couple of tutorials, we're going to add some pagination so that this listing page doesn't get too large and unwieldy. We're going to set up search filtering so that we can actually search for a specific recipe. And then we're also going to set up our category filtering. So stay tuned for that.